Welcome, everyone, to the Black Metropolis Research Consortium's second annual Women's History Month program. I am Allison Sutton, the program manager for the BMRC. Our Women's History Month program started as one of the ways in which we showcase the research and work of our BMRC Fellows, whose research is primarily focused on women. If you did not attend last year's first program, our first annual, and maybe some of you are not familiar with the BMRC Summer Short-Term Fellowship Program, let me just take a moment to share that it is an international and juried competition offering a 1-month residential fellowship here in the city of Chicago. The BMRC Fellowship has, since 2008, engaged scholars, visual and musical artists, writers, public historians, etc., to better formulate new historical narratives of the Black experience. Some focus specifically on Chicago and others more broadly. The new original research and art developed through this program is significant as it illuminates the national and international importance of Black experiences and history. We will soon, I should say, be announcing the next cohort for the summer of 2022. If you're interested and want to read more, please go to the BMRC website, which we'll put in the chat, and look under programs for the Summer Short-Term Fellowship Program. This year, we have titled our program today, Women's Herstory, a conversation about Black feminism, Black queer women, and the arts. One of our former BMRC fellows from 2016, Misty DeBerry, will share their research with you, largely centered on Misty's expertise in Black feminist thought, performance theory, queer of color critique, performance art and practice, and more. I will stop there though, because Misty will be introduced more fully shortly. Let me introduce you to Grace. Dr. Grace D. Gibson is a 2020 BMRC Fellow and will serve as our moderator today. Grace is an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. As a Black future feminist pop culture scholar, Dr. Gibson's area of research centers on Black popular culture, digital humanities, representations of race and gender within comic books, Afrofuturism, and race and new media. Her current book project seeks to explore Black female identities as personified in comics and fandom culture. A second project examines how online Black female academic popular networks produce cultural and technical capital, which act as safe spaces that showcase, interrogate, and celebrate the blending of the academy and pop culture. You can follow Dr. Gibson via blackfuturefeminist.com and on Twitter as gbreezy20. Grace, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Allison. It is a pleasure to be able to return back to another of my many homes, I like to say, with the BMRC, and a pleasure to be in conversation and tune in to our speaker today, Misty DeBerry. So I'm going to give you all a bio to kind of give some context of who Misty is before they go into their presentation. All right. Misty DeBerry is a senior lecturer in women's, gender, and sexuality studies and serves as an artist scholar in residence with the Consortium for Race, Migration, and Sexuality. She holds a PhD in performance studies from Northwestern University and recently completed a postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Literature and the program in women's and gender studies at MIT. She works across the fields of performance studies, Black feminist thought, queer of color critique, and critical theory. Both her scholarly and artistic work take up the relationship between Black women, embodiment, and psychic violence. She is currently working on a book manuscript, In Due Time, Performance and the Psychic Life of Black Debt, which explores routine modes of debt in the lives of Black women and their engagement with both aesthetic and everyday performance to dismantle such routines. Misty's current performance piece, Little Sister, a Black temporal solo play, tells the story of a nomadic child spirit who shapeshifts across several incarnations of Black queer women and disrupt everyday acts of harm across familial, small groups, and intimate partner spaces. In addition to her research and performance work, Misty engages in healing practices through her training in Reiki and transformative justice. All righty, Misty, I'm already ready, and I'm ready to hear what you have to say. So without further ado, Dr. Misty DeBerry, the stage is for you.
Thank you so much for such a loving introduction and welcoming. And thank you, Allison, T, and Marsha for having me back. And for those of you who decided to share some time with us today, I can't see your faces, but I've seen a few familiar names. So thank you all, new friends and returning friends. Yeah, I just want to say my time at the BMRC a few summers ago was so meaningful. It was just incredibly sweet, the nurture that our cohort received, the specificity of attention and direction. And in a large part, what really resonated or rose to the top for me from that experience was a time to sit with methods, right? So it's funding that really supports an archival research method, as I'm sure most of you are aware. And that was a new method for me during my summer there. And so I thought it would make sense or be a nice return to contextualize my talk today in that same vein of method, and really opening up a space for us to think about performance, performance art, in the lives of Black femmes or Black women, but specifically what it means to look at the world, to look at behavior, people's behavior in their environments through not only the analytic of performance, but also thinking a bit about what performance and all its instantiations can look like as a practice, right? So that's what I'll be opening up for today. And I'll ask you if you haven't already, part of my work as a performance scholar and artist and pulling from my many practices is I really try to open up a space for folks to center at the top of the talk. We're so in and out of these Zoom spaces, and in honor of Women's History Month, just to allow yourself to settle into the fact of that today is a celebration indeed, to give yourself a bit of grace and slowing down a bit and honoring your time and being here today. Okay, so with that, I am going to share my screen here. All right, so today the conversation that I offer to you is all about debt. Debt as financial, material, and debt as an ideological, affective force. And what I am interested in is how such forces regulate Black women's behavior across the everyday sphere in the US. So with that, for the next 16, 17 minutes or so, I will bring you into the world of my work. And if you will permit me, I'll do so at first through a story, a brief story that performs the dynamics at question here or in my project. I will then turn to share an overlay of the conceptual apparatus of my work. And then lastly, we can turn to one another, to me, and ask away the questions or share the thoughts, musings that may come up with you during our time. So with that, a brief story. Debt. Noun. Something that is owed or due. Indebtedness. Noun. The feeling of owing gratitude for a service or favor. On a warm, muggy day outside of Houston, Texas in mid-July, a Black woman drives along US Highway 290. She has been on the road for months, back and forth from Naperville, Illinois to Waller County, Texas, surviving on temporary jobs and staying with friends. She had been searching for full-time employment in the Houston metropolitan area where she longed to permanently reside. She had been barely surviving from one lousy job to the next, but on this particular day, she had finally landed a good one. Indeed, moments earlier, before she cruised along the early sunlit road, she had called her closest friends and family to celebrate the coming on of a new life. Rolling down her window, she popped a fresh pack of cigarettes against her thigh when she was signaled to pull over by Texas State Trooper Brian Encina. The driver, the woman, the Black girl, the daughter, the activist, the friend, the job candidate, the college graduate, the sister is Sandra Bland. In a dash cam recording that would play repeatedly across socially mediated sites during the summer of 2015, audiences across the nation watched stunned as a supposed routine traffic stop escalated into a full-on brutal attack against Bland, followed by her suspicious death. Most of us watch as Bland grows rightfully irritated with the trooper who demanded that she put her cigarette out. Wanting to know why she would have to follow such a command inside this private space of her car, Encina, fully flustered and seemingly outsmarted, informs Bland that she is under arrest. Off camera, we hear Bland's awful cries. She tells us, whoever is listening, that the state trooper has slammed her face against the pavement. "Do you feel like a man now?" she declares, followed by, "You're breaking my wrists." In an eerie conclusion that remains to haunt Black activist publics, Bland was found 3 days later hanging inside the Waller County, Texas jail. Her brutalization for the routine traffic violation she had failed to signal a change in lanes and mysterious death launched a heightened platform in the rising movement for Black lives, prompting the ongoing Say Her Name campaign. So now in the days surrounding her harrowing death, social mediated sites and popular news media questioned Bland's behavior with the state trooper, indeed justifying his actions. She had, after all, according to several posts, been excessively emotional, disrespectful to the men in blue. In fact, sheriff reports spurned by the national media quickly disseminated Bland's medical past, emphasizing her struggles with depression, which her family to this day vehemently denies. Now, such an emphasis, right, functioned as evidence in her supposed suicide. Indeed, as criticisms were launched against Bland for an excessive performance of affect, so think rolling of the eyes, audible sighs, irregular vocal pitch, she was deemed at fault, given the lack of deferential decorum. So 2 things here. First, this means that Black women and other marginalized genders are always already marked immoral in the eyes of the state, particularly through embodied affects, which are weaponized as a means to determine one's social value. Next, consider that as the state trooper flags Sandra Bland down, he is indeed hailing her deeper into the site of minoritarian subjectivity, the proverbial hey you of what Frantz Fanon and Louis Althusser write about differently, but as racist ideologies for Fanon at least, here via the police force calling a racialized subject towards deferential modes of performance that are to be conceded at the site of the body. But Bland made no concession. She insisted on finishing her cigarette, raised her voice, responded with insults. So similar to the quips brought against Gabby Douglas, member and gold medalist of the US gymnast team, who failed to cover her heart during the national anthem, where was Bland's performance of obeisance, that is debt, to the US nation state that served to protect her? So indebtedness, you may ask, and here at the site where we have come to unfortunately recognize as spectacular yet also everyday forms of state-sanctioned racialized violence. Yes. Pause to consider. Debt is a relationship, right? And a performative dynamic that is grounded in domination and submission, a commingling of hyper and hypo affects. The relationship is subtle, but ever present. And as it pertains to Black life, such a performative dynamic is grounded in two logics. So first, in general, debt is but a perpetual asymmetrical exchange of owing something that is due. That is, in a debtor-creditor relationship, it is only the creditor, such as the state, who can set the terms, who enforces such terms, and who alone can forgive us our debts. Second, to center Black life in the wake of emancipation, which although claimed to set free enslaved Black Africans, Black communities were organized in a new relation of domination with the state. I'm very much talking with Saidiya Hartman here. This new relation of domination took the shape of an imposed indebtedness to the state and the men who served to protect it as a price for having been set free. So given the legacies of such logics, we may say Sandra Bland defaulted on performing an affective embodied vocabulary of indebtedness to a country who had, after all, granted her and her ancestors freedom. And while Bland gives us an example of the law hailing a subject into modes of being, deferential modes of being, that such modes are evocative of deferential corporeality, indebted behavior, I cannot turn loose the role of the financial in hailing subjects into similar modes of being. And so how do the logics of debt accumulate and circulate across the everyday sphere with particular regards to Black women's lives in the US? What are the conditions that produce feelings of debt and indebtedness across Black spaces? And how might regulatory performances of debt be interrupted on the body, potentially producing alternative felt economies? So taken by the relationship between Black women, performance, and everyday modes of late capitalism, this set of questions have found its way into my current project, In Due Time, Performance and the Psychic Life of Black Debt. I explore how, as Grace shared earlier, routine modes of debt restrict Black women's behavior across the everyday sphere and their subsequent engagement with both aesthetic and everyday performance to dismantle such routines. So just a bit more context, contemporary modes of debt, they impede Black women's access to material resources as well as psychic well-being, constraining our behavior and ability to thrive. They range from federal student loan services that disproportionately target the lives of Black and Brown women, leaving them in scores of generational debt, to anti-Black ideologies taken up by mainstream media outlets justifying the violence against Sandra Bland, for example, for not performing modes of reverence, for essentially defaulting again, not displaying those embodied acts towards the nation state Said another way, modes of indebtedness, then we can say they gather in material force and affective meaning across the repetition of the everyday sphere, where I argue such behavioral routines become routine, right? Behavioral responses, pardon me, become routine. They become habituated. And so this brings us then to the central question of my project, and that's if notions of indebtedness, right, signal an accumulation of behavior over a period of time, I'm asking, how might we employ time as an aesthetic device in order to interrupt such processes? Okay. So in this way, I look at Black women's relationship with debt through the lens of durational performance. And that's aesthetic renderings that bring attention to the passing of time. I look at Black women's engagement with durational performance via close readings of socially mediated happenings and other durational texts like the sitcom. Commercial campaigns by credit-making corporations, online discourses, hashtag Publix, immersive site-specific performance, as well as iconic Black literary texts. And so what I do is I situate indebtedness as this affective temporal performance between individuals and groups. Thus, through theories and methods that are central to performance studies, Black feminist thought, queer of color critique, what I'm doing is I'm making connections between structural formations of debt and its impact on the Black gendered body. And that's what that performance lens allows me to do. So across literary sites, performance sites, and popular culture, I use the rubric then of Black feminist performance to recontextualize what we can consider as instantiations of durational performance. And I see these durational performances within a broader feminist theatrical lineage. So, you know, we might want to pause and consider the Harlem Renaissance, which featured solo performance work by the likes of Billie Holiday, and Bessie Smith, or the late 60s and 70s amid Black feminist happenings and other avant-garde theatrical aesthetics captured in the work of Adrienne Kennedy and Ntozake Shange. A turn to monologic performance during the 80s and 90s with Anna DeVere Smith, Sarah Jones, and with the turn of the century and growing popularity of the likes of Sharon Bridgeforth and the theatrical jazz aesthetic to the late 2010s, indexing racial body art, mixed media installations captured in the work of Tamika Norris, and Okwe Kwasili. My apologies, Okwe, for not saying your name with the loveliness it deserves. So such remarkable Black women artists have offered a capacious aesthetic, really, that comes to represent Black feminist performance, right? So what I mean there is renderings via Black experimental theatricality that engages a complex mix of discursive circulations, gestural economies, historical affects that render the Black gendered body at times otherworldly and at others radically banal, and always, always subversively contextual. And I'm speaking with Dee Sweeney Madison there. Okay, so returning to our opening story and beginning to pivot us towards a closing, what I'm emphasizing is that via state-based apparatuses, okay, so the law, or for our purposes today, the financial, specifically debt, Black women are hailed into modes of indebted behavior. At the same time, the conceptual apparatus of my project recognizes that modes of indebtedness, having codified across generational legacies, as I said earlier, they gather, right? They gather rather in material force and effective meaning across the repetition, right? So that temporal element, the repetition of the everyday sphere, where I argue those responses become habit. So in closing, again, that central question of if notions of habituation and indebtedness signal an accumulation of behavior over a period of time, how can we begin to tap into time, temporal aesthetics, to dismantle such processes of habituation? Said another way, I'm concerned with the various ways that socially constructed notions of time keep Black subjects in subordinate or distressed positions in relation to racist state-sanctioned structures. For example, consider that 5 years after Sandra Bland's suspicious hanging while in police custody, her family is still waiting for some sense of accountability to be taken by the state of Texas. That is why, as Michael Hanchart notes, Black theater scholar, to be Black in the US in part means to wait for everything, from waiting to use the proper restroom, waiting for equal education, and waiting for legislative change during the civil rights era, to this contemporary moment of waiting for healthcare, police protection as if, and loan forgiveness. I'm saying then that modes of felt time, like waiting, enduring, mourning, anticipating, and prevailing, undergird a debt economy and evoke simultaneously a commingling of hypo and hyper affects, enraging and numbing that constrict, constrain, and regulate Black women's day-to-day lives. Further, such structured temporal disjunctures articulate not a distinction, but as Fred Moten has offered, as an interanimation of affective registers that are ongoing by a lulling sense of passing on. Meanwhile, Black lives are confined to felt temporal foreclosures that keep the Black body front and center, numb and alert, or as Sandra Bland bore witness to, revved up and fastened down. So this means it's crucial then to hold the debt economy and its coercive affects together with notions of temporality, specifically duration. Duration and durational performance marks the unmarked intervals of life, giving texture and tenor to Black women's lives, from waiting for accountability during a year or years of racial unrest, to enduring the day-to-day regulation of affective being, from holding fast within 30-day cycles of check-to-check living, to waiting for our names to be said. Thank you.
All righty. Wow. Thank you for that, Misty. Quite powerful and gave me a lot to think about, especially in this idea of debt. I definitely had one perspective, maybe a couple, but to hear the many different levels, as my students would say, there's levels to this. I really do appreciate you opening my eyes to that. And with that, I do have a couple of questions that I kind of picked up as I was tuned in here in this idea of debt. So do you see where society or, the world at large will come to a point where they will acknowledge its debt that is owed to Black women, whether that's performance-wise or literally in that sense? If versus Black women, owing the debt, will the debt be returned to Black women? And if so, what ways might that be translated?
I'm just taking notes so I won't forget, and my pencil keeps breaking as I'm writing. Thank you for that. That's a poignant question. I appreciate the platform to think about it. Well, yeah, so it's like 2 points here you're asking. Will we ever get to a point where, I don't know, society writ large recognizes the ongoing, overlapping, simultaneous deaths, those we can't even imagine, to Black women, and then what might that look like? So I think I'll think about that in the reverse order, because when you're asking that question, what came to mind for me is I write a chapter on Toni Morrison's Paradise, and she very poignantly, as she does everything poignantly, writes about writing that novel as a sense of paying homage to her indebtedness to Black communities, right, and Black spaces, and for sure Black women, particularly the Black writers. She calls to mind in terms of whose shoulders she's standing on. But she had felt so much love and support coming off of Beloved that Paradise was a gift for her. So in one way, I think that there are ongoing networks that we all in some way are probably tapped into, like mutual aid practices that have been happening well before we had this lovely language of mutual aid, of taking care of one another, doing each other's hair, helping with childbirth and so forth. So there are those things that are happening, right? And we have different names that we could, share that are doing good work. Asia Marie Brown, Alexine Pauline Gumbs come to mind, right? Okay. And so then we think about, or we might here together think about what type of structural modes of redress might be offered. And I'm skeptical. I mean, of course, things have changed, these inchings along of legislative breaks that have made perhaps having more access to resources available. But I struggle with our prevalent systems of accounting, because I think those systems in and of themselves do not have the language woven in that recognizes accountability, humility, presence, releasing notions of power. So in terms of a large structural, I don't know. I think we just keep working towards and not asking of our systems to take care of us or see us in ways that is outside of the logic they operate within.
Absolutely. And I definitely don't foresee like there would ever be like a concrete answer.
Yeah, sure.
So it would be this kind of like constant working in progress, and even maybe so not expecting for that to happen. Because then we're constantly, as you're saying, going to be waiting for that to happen. So
yeah. Well,
thank you for that response on there.
Yeah.
Also, so this idea of debt as a very multifaceted idea. So you speak, very specifically with Sandra Bland on this, but how is it maybe personally that you got to having this conversation about debt, and what was the kind of, I guess, lighting of the match for you to speak towards this topic?
Yeah, thank you. I also want to be mindful that I see questions coming in, and I know Grace and I will turn our attentions towards those. So just to acknowledge that they're coming into the chat box, and feel free to use that space to put out words or feelings. They don't have to be formulated questions. But yes, how did I get to debt? Well, to return to my opening prompt, was a matter of method. I was in early stages at Northwestern. I think I just got past my prospectus, which was traumatic in and of itself. And I was awarded this wonderful fellowship from BMRC. And as scholars and thinkers and practitioners and activists, when you're digging around and trying to follow your thoughts, I think we all kind of have this expression of falling in the rabbit hole. And so I ended up on thinking about debt through falling in a rabbit hole. I was actually one of the artists that I talk about. Her name is Chantelle Martin, and she's talks about her work as a stream of consciousness illustrator, right? So she does live time drawings and illustrations, which you might actually like, Grace, giving your interests. And so I was looking at her work in terms of thinking about durational aesthetics, because that was initially my focus. I was looking at a Black feminist avant-garde that hasn't been quite articulated and following this notion of temporality. Well, while watching Chantelle Martin, she does this beautiful illustrative abstract thing. And then it's connected to, it opens up, it acts as an overture for a campaign by American Express on helping young Black and Brown disenfranchised youth in the South get into debt responsibly. And I thought, that's wild. And it just seemed to, it's like one of those moments where you're thinking or writing or researching and you can feel something coming together. And so I just began to think about the temporal dynamics inherent to debt itself as a performative structure. And it just felt like I finally got what's holding everything together. So it was just a method of following a lead.
Great, yeah, and I know about that rabbit hole very much. So yes, it was interesting, you know, like when you watch these commercials and you see definitely Black women being at the center of them, you know, being whether the spokesperson or in the commercials themselves, how we sometimes don't necessarily think as deep as the fact that like this person is kind of representing this, not intentionally, but is very much being used as the face.
Yes.
Of
yes.
this. And so you kind of have to wonder like, maybe we need to restructure that, refocus that, resituate this idea. And, you know, I guess why might Black women be kind of the target for, you know, being this face? It may be just because it's the easiest thing and it's been the repetitive thing that has been happening all along. But, you know, specifically Black women are, you know, that face that we're always seeing.
Yeah, you know, it's the thing that I think frustrates all of us. On one side or one part, Black cultural production, specifically film cultural production, isn't really fully appreciated, right, and valued, right, and those like heart-centered and even, you know, critical ways. At the same time, Black aesthetics are like when they are taken on by non-Black communities, function as a type of cultural capital, right, or can, right, and can seem to mark a type of coolness through proximity, right. And, you know, Black women, we do a lot for the market. You know, we are contributing, paying folks. You know, we're doing a lot of care labor, and we're in school a lot, and so debt, comes is a thing for a lot of us in a particular class structure. And so I think it's all those things working together. It's exploitative, basically, and I think it works because. In a way, it's, I want to say with a lot of cynicism, Black aesthetics sell when large corporations are trying to, you know, give off a different vibe.
Absolutely, yes. It just further acknowledges that Black women are needed, and sometimes in more ways than we necessarily maybe not want to participate. But yes. I do want to make sure that our audience get their questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the Q&A and start there and get as many of these questions as we can. So we'll first start with Cinnamon Williams' question. And acknowledging, this was beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm curious to know how you think and feel about the felt debts within intimate spaces between Black social subjects. How might indebtedness play out between Black men and women, Black women and children, and Black women between Black women? And how do you figure the structures of debt that are enforced by the state and intimate relationships between Black people? So we got a lot going on here, and you know, tackle it how you see fit there.
Hi, Cinnamon. Thank you for that question. It's good to see you. I just feel your presence in this space and for offering out something so rich and fun to think through. And so feel free to chat alongside of me while I'm speaking if you'd like. Oh, yes. Okay. So debt, in terms of its intra-community dynamics, yes. While I was reading my paper, I realized, I'm not sure I emphasized that. I think about that so much. I write about that. Indeed, my turning towards Toni Morrison in Paradise, as well as Bill Cosby, gives me a space to, I use it as a space to think about all of those dynamics. I'm trying to pull out an example. Well, I mentioned Bill Cosby. You talk about Black men and Black women, and Bill Cosby was one of my initial case studies for this project, given how in light of all the accusations that came out around his sexual misconduct, the logic that was being circulated, right, across social media initially, particularly between Black communities, was, how can we air our dirty laundry, right? But more specifically, notwithstanding, of course, all the ways in which Black males are already predetermined as sexual predators, but, alongside of that, also this rhetoric of how could you, those of you who were of color and accusing Cosby, how could you go against someone who's given us so much, right? So this logic of indebtedness, and that's to say that the way it shows up, but in Black spaces, several, we can think about in terms of gender violence and family units, post-Reconstruction, when Black families or during Reconstruction were allowed, indeed made to marry, that family unit between the heterosexual family unit between the husband and the wife's belongings, even her very word, right, were secured through the patriarch, right? This is notions of coverture, right? It affected Black families too. So I'm bringing that up to say, when I look at the Bill Cosby situation, and very much Felicia Rashad, who played his, on-camera wife and kind of culturally represents that being in his life, I look at her continual modes of refusing what was being his accusations as a lingering notion of coverture, a type of indebtedness to not only the white patriarchy, the state, right? I mean, the patris, which we are coerced to respond towards, but also the Black patriarch, right? So it shows up there. And lastly, because I can go on, it also shows up even with an indebtedness to Blackness itself within Black spaces, how we perform Blackness, how Blackness is distributed across libidinal economies, and then how those corporeal arrangements allow for structural modes of privilege, as well as psychic dynamics historically within Black spaces, right? And even between mothers, fathers, parents, and children, right? A type of, there's an indebtedness there that perhaps we don't ever want to figure out, how would I ever pay the debt that I have to my mother? I was fortunate enough to have a good relationship with her. So I think it's a lot of both ands. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to advocate for us thinkers and doers and movers and shakers, to approach debt as beyond and alongside its material ramifications, its use of numbers and stats, really getting into the minutia of how it determines the ways in which we turn to one another. I hope that opens that up a bit more in ways that are kind of fun and satisfying.
Yes, this is good. And I'm going to pull in something that Marsha mentioned, and then go to our next, get to our next questions, how she appreciated the work and how it gives new language to think about Ketanji Brown Jackson and what she has been experiencing, as well as the experiences that Black women have every day navigating relationships to indebtedness. I think that's a really good idea to point out as well. Another question we have from Beverly is, does it occur to you that we cannot really prepare for being in debt to society or people in power, because the sand on the beaches changes so much. How do we not let the anger at this infect our lives and our actions?
Yeah. Hello, Beverly Cook. I hope this is the Beverly Cook I think it is, that I worked with in my very early days at Columbia College. I don't know, but either way, thank you for your presence today and for such a lovely question. Yes, well, so this allows me to chat with you all a bit about the practice component to my work, which I pull from just my experience as a classically trained actor and mover, as well as my work as a Reiki therapist and the stuff I do with transformative justice. And it's really to say, one thing I like to contextualize with my students over and over again is, when we talk about and read about and think towards the worlds we long to be a part of, we also must consider, how do I know, or how will I know when I'm in the presence of that world that I long to exist within? And so that's to say, you know, you asked, how can we work with the anger and so forth? And, you know, Audre Lorde would tell us to lean right into our anger, of course. But it's also to say, I heavily believe in a type of practice that allows for, quite frankly, a slowing down. You know, debt steals so much from us, our current rage, our past rage, our rage to come, but also our labor ongoingly, even how we are with each other, like fast responses, you know, constantly in the world of the academy, not being enough, can't do enough. So one small thing like I've been thinking a lot about is just stealing back time, you know, naps, you know, and I'm in a privileged position where I can take a 20-minute nap here and there. But I guess in terms of how do you prepare, I guess it's a matter of, and not to Pollyanna it, but ways to steal back or take back, to heal, really, when that's possible or wanted. The impact of that ongoing kind of psychic minutia of financial state-based trauma. So it's just to say, lastly, that I think your question, for me, warrants a type of daily practice, or as much as you can practice, of coming into a fuller awareness with the body, such that I think a lot of times we know our rage, but we might not be aware of our smaller angers or resentments, and how to tease those out. And that would require us moving through the world when we can a bit differently. I hope that opens some things up to pull out and sit with.
Excellent, excellent. That I was very much excited when I saw the Nat Ministry picture, because I've recently come to learn about that, and I'm like, yes, that is a very much necessary ministry there.
Yeah.
One last question, which I think is a really good one to kind of close us out here, and then I'm going to pass the mic back to Allison. From Rebecca, where she says, your work deeply resonates and inspires me. I'm curious how you sustain your emotional self in your work, and have there been moments when your research and or writing process have been triggering? If so, how do you personally, professionally navigate through that?
Wow, that was a wonderful question. I didn't catch you ask that.
Rebecca.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Rebecca. I just appreciate you turning our attention to such a prompt. How do I sustain my emotional self? And has the writing been triggering? We should do a panel on this. You know, I do a lot to try to sustain my emotional self. I moved here to Hanover, Lebanon, actually, outside of Hanover, where my college is. In the middle of COVID, I graduated in my living room with my cat and moved here. And I'm completely isolated in this incredibly rural intensely, problematically white space. I call New Hampshire the Alabama of the South. I wish somebody told me. But I'm saying that to say that the impact of maintaining research across major life transitions, that emotional fallout is difficult. It can be, and it has been for me. I do a lot of things. I do Reiki. I've trained in Reiki for a long time. Talk more about that later another day, or you can email me. And I do transformative justice stuff, the physical part of it, breathing, being present. I've gone on herbal supplements. I do all kinds of things to try to tend to my emotional well-being. And in terms of the writing being triggering, yeah, sometimes it's just hard to come to the table, period, because of all the muck of being a woman, being femme, being Black, in the academy, and this ongoing hyper mode of competing. You usually greet people like, how are you doing? Oh, I worked on 3 articles. Oh, I worked on 10, that kind of that kind of stress really has an impact. So it's just to say, lately I've been working a lot on compassion, kindness, being gentle with myself, slowing down, saying no, and understanding that as radical. And it doesn't even need to be, but understanding it that way. But it's a major part of my life, because I feel like there have been times when I felt like if I die, when I do, but if I were to drop dead in the middle of teaching, they would, shuttle someone else in. And feeling that insignificance has been incredibly sobering, given how much labor I'm sure a lot of us offer to this work for so many reasons and so many students. And there's just so much I could say. It's so important. So I just keep taking stock therapy, prescribed stuff. I mean, just to be really, really transparent about it. It's not always, it can be hard and isolating. But I'm also grateful for a big toolbox of things, especially friends. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's very confirming and affirming, that we're not alone in this, and that, what you're offering are definitely tools that many of us can either continue doing, begin doing. So I just want to reiterate, thank you for, creating this space. Thank you for your presentation and offering such amazing, thoughtful words for us on today. What a great way to kind of begin to close out Women's History Month in this capacity, but we'll always have these conversations even going forward. So thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time to be able to share that with us. And so, like I said, I'm going to pass the mic to Allison to close out.
Okay, thank you, Grace and Misty. That really was beautiful.
Thank you.